If you're an endurance athlete, you know the feeling, or at least you dread it. That moment where everything is going great, and then suddenly, bam, your body just quits. It's called hitting the wall, and it can turn your best race into a painful crawl. So let's get into the science of what's really happening during this catastrophic collapse. So you might be wondering, just how common is this? Is it just something that happens to a few unlucky people? Well, no. According to some solid research, this number, around 40%, that's the chunk of marathon runners who experience this. Yep. The classic thinking is that they've simply run out of their main fuel source. Their carbohydrate reserves are totally empty. But, as we're going to find out, an empty gas tank might not be the whole story. What is going on deep down on a physiological level that brings a highly trained athlete to a complete standstill? That is the big question, the central mystery we're going to unpack right now. To really get to the bottom of this, we're going to treat it like a detective case. We'll look at the evidence, line up the usual suspects, and figure out who's really responsible for this performance breakdown. And in our investigation, it really boils down to two main suspects. Suspect number one is the obvious one, a full-blown energy crisis. You just run out of gas. Simple. But suspect number two, it's a lot more interesting. It's the idea that your own brain is intentionally slamming on the brakes as a kind of safety switch. Okay, let's start with suspect number one, the good old-fashioned energy crisis. To really get this, you gotta think of your body as a kind of high-performance hybrid engine. See, we have two different fuel tanks. The first one is fat. It's our diesel fuel. It's super abundant, we've got tons of it, but it's slow burning. Then you have glycogen, which is just stored carbs. This stuff is our high-octane, fast-burning rocket fuel. It gives us a ton of power, but the catch is the tank is really, really small. Now here's where it gets critical. Look at this chart. It shows how our fuel mix changes completely depending on how hard we're working. At a low intensity, like a slow jog, you can see we're burning mostly fat, about 80%. But watch what happens when you ramp it up to race pace. All of a sudden, we're overwhelmingly dependent on that rocket fuel. Up to 70% of our energy is now coming from those very limited carbs. And that's the whole problem, right? When you're pushing your limits, you're draining that tiny little tank of rocket fuel at a crazy fast rate. When it runs dry, your muscles literally can't produce the force needed anymore. In the science world, they call this peripheral fatigue. The problem is out there in the muscles themselves. But an empty tank is only part of the puzzle. Let's get to our second suspect. And this one isn't in your muscles, it's all in your head. It's the idea of the brain's built-in safety switch. To get this, you need to meet these things called group 3 and 4 muscle afferents. Okay, that sounds complicated, but just think of them as tiny little spies. They're sensory nerves embedded in your muscles, and their only job is to send a constant stream of reports back to headquarters, your brain, telling it how much stress the muscles are under. And here is where it gets wild. These little spies have two totally conflicting jobs. On the one hand, their signals tell the brain, hey, we need more oxygen down here, which is good, it helps performance. But on the other hand, as those stress signals get louder and louder, they also tell the brain, oh, shut it down, we're approaching the red line. This is what we call central fatigue. Your brain is actively turning down the power to protect you. And hey, you don't have to take my word for it. This is a direct quote from one of the landmark studies in this area. It says this feedback loop flat out impairs performance and limits the exercising human. Your brain is deliberately slowing you down to stop you from hurting yourself. So how do we know this for sure? Well, this chart is basically the smoking gun. It's incredible. In a wild experiment, scientists use a painkiller to block those feedback nerves from sending signals to the brain. Now look at the data. On the placebo, athletes averaged 275 watts. But when the brain was deaf to the muscles' screams for help, their power output jumped to 297 watts. That is a nearly 8% increase. The power was there all along. The brain was just holding it back. Okay, so we've identified our two culprits, an empty fuel tank in the muscles and a worried, overprotective brain. So how in the world do athletes get around this? Well, first they tackle the fuel problem head-on by essentially tricking their bodies. First off, let's look at the sheer scale of the fuel problem. This chart shows what happens to your muscle glycogen after a really tough workout. I mean, look at that drop. You started a baseline of around 356 units, and after you're done, you're down to just 29. That's not just empty, that's running on fumes. But that near total wipeout is actually the secret.
It sets off alarm bells inside your body. So athletes have learned to use this. It's a simple two-step process. Step 1, you do a hard workout to intentionally empty the tank. Step 2, for the next few days, you just load up on carbohydrates. And the result is, well, it's amazing. Look at this data. The muscle, now terrified of running out of fuel again, doesn't just fill back up to the old baseline of 356. It overshoots, big time, to a mind-boggling 962 units. That's more than a 150% increase over where you started. You've basically convinced your body to install a bigger fuel tank.
But the story doesn't stop with the muscles. Just when we thought we had it figured out, scientists discovered something else that does this, and it does it by a whopping 60%. That's right, glycogen supercompensation happens in your brain too. Researchers found that after you totally exhaust yourself, your brain's cortex, the part that controls movement, also learns to store more fuel, increasing its own glycogen stores by up to 60%. Your brain is adapting too, giving itself more energy to handle the stress next time.
So let's bring this all home. What's the big takeaway from all this? Well, it's that understanding your physical limits and pushing past them isn't about just one single thing. This table really sums it up perfectly. You're fighting a war on two fronts. On one side, you have peripheral fatigue, that empty fuel tank, and you fight that with smart nutrition, like glycogen supercompensation. On the other side, you have central fatigue, the brain's safety switch, and you manage that with smart pacing and mental strategies to keep your brain from panicking.
So if there's one thing to remember, it's this. Hitting the wall isn't a simple switch that flips from on to off. It's a constant, complex negotiation. It's a tense conversation between your muscles, which are screaming for more fuel, and your brain, which is trying to make sure you survive to see another day. And all this leaves us with one last really provocative question. Remember that experiment where blocking the brain's safety switch led to an 8% jump in performance? If our brain is constantly acting as a governor, always keeping a little something in reserve for survival, what does that mean about our true ultimate physical limits? How much further could we actually go?